Hi, welcome to my channel. I'm Elizabeth Liz Muschett. Today is the Astrology Star Sisters. We're talking about dwarf planets, the seed point of renewal, and my star sister, colleague, and friend Sue Rose Minahan is here to join me and talk about the dwarf planets today. Hi, Sue. Welcome.
Hi, Liz. I'm looking forward to this. We've talked about it and we're beginning it. Love it.
Yes, welcome back. Glad to have you.
Thank you.
So to get a hold of Sue, her website is talkcosmos.com and my website is alightpath.com, and we always enjoy hearing from you. And the dwarf planets are located in the Kuiper Belt, which is just beyond Neptune. Would you like to say anything more about this slide, Sue?
Well, they have friends. There's a whole colony of them, as we've discovered. And that is really after the beginning of this century in the early 2000s. And one discovery with the next. So it's really transforming our concept of the extent of astrological archetypes.
Exactly. So what is a dwarf planet? A dwarf planet is a small planetary object that is in direct orbit around the sun. It's massive enough to be gravitationally rounded and has not cleared its orbital neighborhood of other objects. In order of diameter or size, it's Pluto, Eris, Haumea, Makemake, Gangan, Horar, Sedna, Ceres, and Orcus, and undetermined for Salacia. Do you want to finish talking about what's on the rest of this slide, Sue?
Well, a bit. They have different names for the very fact that these planets, well, Pluto is a main character in this whole pantheon because its category was astronomically, with the scientists, changed to a dwarf planet. However, now it's like the captain, or you might say the leader of this entire group. So they're called Plutinos, or else because they're past Neptune, which is still one of the 8 primary undisputed planets. Well, that's including the sun and the moon. Pardon me, as I try to get categorized, and then I realize that there's different definitions of that because those are luminaries. Fact is that they can be called trans-Neptunians. So it's TNP because they are past Neptune. And that can seem disconcerting. It's like, well, which one are they? Well, they're one and all. It's like bread is a carb, but bread is, yes, we'll stop at that.
And the exception is Ceres, which is believed to have been pushed into the asteroid belt. And when they first discovered her, and she's been discovered for quite some time, they thought she was an asteroid, but have changed her classification.
And she's large. She really deserves. And in our training, Liz's and mine, we learned directly from Alan Clay, and since then have integrated this. She's what he calls, which I really love that because of her mythology, our inner dwarf planet. She, in the mythology, she walked on Earth for a long time. So it makes all kinds of sense that that asteroid would be somehow mystically called Ceres, because she is between Mars and Jupiter, which are distinctly, well, a personal planet and a social planet.
Thank you, Sue. So the dwarf planet seed point of focus, we're going to talk about Haumea today, Pluto, and Sedna. And do you want to say anything more about this slide?
You're so kind. Yes. We've talked about this idea of the dwarf planets as a series since for 6 months, let's say, because Haumea was the first to ingress into its new sign, and then followed by Pluto. That was in November of 2022. And then lately, following that, was Sedna. Now, each of these have gone back and forth, as we'll notice, but that's why we're beginning with Haumea. And I might add that with these dwarf planets, which are all relating to transformation in some dimension, they seem to be synergetic. They work in tangent with other ingresses and aspects.
There's cycles within cycles within cycles.
Well put. Thank you, Liz. Yes, ma'am.
So we're calling it the seed point activations. And like Sue mentioned, Haumea started it off in 2022. And then there's 5 times that she hits her 0 point. And then Sedna will have 3 0 point activations, 2 in 2023 and 1 in 2024. And then Pluto had 2 in 2023 and 3 in 2025. So it's interesting that 2 of the dwarf planets have 5 activations or initiations at that 0 point. Anything else?
Well, it might be because Sedna is such an elliptical orbit. But one only point I will bring up is Haumea's in Scorpio, Sedna's in Gemini, and Pluto's in Aquarius, which you will see, but neither one of us thought that people might like to know that right now. That's all.
Thank you, Sue.
Yeah.
And we're going to start with the dwarf planet Haumea, and she transmutes a rebirth path. Has the fastest rotation at 4 hours, egg shape, orbits 284 years, and she'll be in Scorpio from November of 2022 to December of 2049. And Haumea is the 3rd dwarf planet after Pluto and MakeMake.
Now, I don't know if what's our next slide, because we haven't memorized those, but that egg shape is really because it being the fastest, from what I understand, if it went any faster, it wouldn't, it's just at its maximum point, which is rather incredible.
Right, because when it rotates faster, it kind of elongates that roundness.
Well, yes, but it would be impossible to maintain, is my understanding, that it's really changing, which is an interesting thought, because not all the planets even rotate. Like I think Venus, some of them never show their their orbit is one thing, their rotation is another factor.
So we're going to give you a little bit of background on Haumea, and the picture we used is from Alan Clay's book about Haumea, and Sue and I are both graduates of the Dwarf Planet University. So why don't you tell us about Haumea, Sue?
It has everything to do with birth and rebirth. That takes a long time to kind of concentrate about, because newness, we're used to perhaps using our calendars. Yet Haumea is a Hawaiian goddess who is really the mother. She birthed Pele, which over in Kilauea on the island where I'm living has been erupting now for weeks. She just stopped today, but she'll probably come back again. Pele was the only birth that she gave on a natural, as we think of females giving birth, but all the rest were from her body in every form. So it's a lot like Mother Nature, but it is rejuvenation, and it's life through pressure. So this isn't just, perhaps for females who would realize that with labor pains in that regard, that it isn't just a simple affair. It's pain involved. It's working towards it. So birth and rebirth here, transformation, is a powerful, powerful energy that is like an entire backdrop, along with these other planets that we'll be talking about, instigating the direction. Because on a personal basis and on a collective basis, especially in Scorpio, that has everything to do about power and powerlessness, and has everything to do about our resources that we exchange in order to empower. It's extreme, intense.
And a volcano, when it's erupting, can be destructive, but it's creating more land. And sometimes they produce more ash, and sometimes it takes many years for whatever came out of the volcano to transmute transmute and change into, growing plants, etc.
Yeah. And that's just one of her children, but absolutely. That's exactly. You're right.
So the Haumea Scorpio archetype, Sue talked about the pressure and crisis, reshaping and rebirth process. The creative source, it's increased intuitive ability, transformative and regenerative. And we already talked about the orbit being 284 years, and we talked about the Scorpio transit from late 2022 to 2049. So it's a 27-year process in Scorpio.
I'm so glad, Liz, you brought in increased intuitive ability. And I suppose with Scorpio, of course, this is a wonderful archetypal truth that it potentially people can experience. So we've been living in a very concrete world of form, and it's seeing it in a different perspective and having Haumea as one support to lead us along with these other planets to look at those signs and learn that language of the intuitive world is
Well, and then Scorpio
strong.
energy is about the underworld, so it's not surprising that the volcano is spewing things from inside the earth out. So it's, such a great representative of that. So I don't know, but it's possible that we might have more volcanic activity for 27 years.
Reykjavik is happening. I think in Japan. I haven't kept up all, but I know I hear that. So it's the Ring of Fire, of course, is around, the Pacific Ocean. But a few of them, yes, they're
Yeah, and we've
active.
had
The one
few major earthquakes as of late. So
yes, indeed, in Greece, unfortunately, I think it was in Greece. It was pretty tragic, actually, which it always is. It's a change is. We hope and trust that we can learn to merge our differences or eliminate, dissolve, and unite more.
okay, now we're going to go on to dwarf planet Sedna and about destiny of the soul path, awakening our unconscious, soul consciousness, spiritual destiny, transcendence, nurturing on a transpersonal level, and it's the higher octave of the moon and Ceres, according to Alan Clay. Would you like to add anything, Sue?
Those are well put for the higher octave because it has to do with nurturing ourselves. There's a different relationship. What I love here is having Haumea and Sedna. On a quick basis, they're very similar, but also distinctly portals of their own. Because Haumea is a rebirth of, there's a physicality too. Here with Sedna, and I'm not quite, but I think so, thinking of the fact that, the volcanoes and birth coming out of her whole body. But with Sedna, this is more of a spiritual basis where you, in the mythology, which we'll bring up in a moment, it's a change from one identity to recognizing your true calling, you could say, on a spiritual path. And when I did transits for trying to understand through our class sessions and since thinking about it, it wasn't really a pivotal moment. It was more a phase of life, which Haumea is too. But I think Sedna, she does, as we will see, her path, she's way out there past the Kuiper belt. It's a really another focus.
So here's a few facts about Sedna. Her Gemini transit will be from June of 2023 through 2067, a similar size to Pluto, furthest out in the Kuiper belt at this time, has an extreme elliptical orbit, will be in Gemini for 44 years, and when she's in Sagittarius, just to show you the difference, of the elliptical order. She's in Sagittarius for 1,500 years, plus or minus. And she was discovered in November 19th of 2003.
Yes, and along with the other polarity of Taurus that we just went through, because Taurus was about 50 years, and Scorpio. And it fascinated me to learn that when she was in Scorpio was during the Egyptian legacy back there with the pharaohs. And that was very concerned with death, when your soul could be measured by a feather, if it was pure or not. So it really gives a dimension of what this means to me a little bit, because it's hard to fathom what does this mean. But she's in Gemini now, so we're going to start. It's the most interesting.
Well, I'm going to let Sue take over. She contributed a few slides here, and I'll weigh in from time to time, but go ahead, Sue.
Thank you. And I will learn to pause so I can accept. It's Inuit, which is around the North Pole, the people and the heritage. There are many different variations. Essentially, it was a young woman, some say a princess, some just say a maid, that for whatever purpose had difficulty getting married. Finally, and perhaps she rejected these marriage proposals, but as all heritage, it was important to get married. And it really shows, as we've added here, that it was what or who she aligned with for marriage, perhaps. So if we go to the next, she did marry, and he took her away to his island. It turned out, though, that he was actually a bird king, and he'd fly around in the sky. And there's different interpretations, again, that perhaps she lived in a wee shack. But regardless, she was very isolated and had no one else to confer with or anything of that. And it's also related with the idea that, what does that represent? That birds and many, many mythologies represent our thoughts. They go through the air. It's not a concrete thing. And so here she was not happy with her ideology of whatever it was. And so she asked her father, please come rescue me. For some reason, her mother is not involved with this. It had to do about the father. He did. He gets in a boat and they leave. However, the bird king, according to the stories, became very irate. No way wanted to lose this lovely daughter of his, this wife of his. And they create such a fury with the waves that it's very rocky. And you can look at this like a person's association with emotion, that when the water is emotional and it's fear of letting go of traditions, because what happens, and I'm jumping a little bit here perhaps, but the father pushes her out of the boat to protect himself, realizing these birds wanted the daughter. She clings to the boat, and this is a very sad part as far as looking at the melodrama of this story, cuts her fingers off, and she becomes at that moment transformed. What does it mean? It means that she was attaching herself to the traditions and the thoughts of everything that was not part of her nature, that was part of her heritage that she had been put into. You can look at this not just from females, but any of us. We all have this planet somewhere. And at this moment, many of us were born with it in Aries, and then others were in Taurus because of its shortened. It was late Aries, and then since the 60s or so, I think it's been in Taurus, but now it's in Gemini, meaning that when you get on this path, you actually transform into how you're sustaining life, because she told us about her fingers.
Well, as her fingers went into the ocean, it created all the creatures of the ocean. And so she's, like the goddess of the sea. So that's it, there's something beautiful that comes from it, even though, she really did not want to get married, but it was such a tradition that she was to get married. And so she wanted to leave that. But then, the creatures of the ocean were formed. That's
And
the mythology.
And I believe too, any of us who want to individuate, I know with evolutionary astrology, this is an enormous factor, is that society, of course, we all want security and we follow society to have the rules and the format. It's important in many respects, yet just like an artist like Picasso, who learned how all the techniques of correct proportion, if you see some of his paintings, he could paint people that looked like people. But then again, he understood the dynamics enough that he could break those rules and recreate what was coming from his mind. And that's what each one of us wants, really, to express who we are. And there's a gift to that.
Exactly. So Sedna in Gemini, the archetype, painful crisis of transcending to a new consciousness from the old hereditary framework. Then onto our spiritual path, holding on or releasing Saturnian roles, and the seed point was at 0 degrees Gemini, and the orbit is elliptical and it's 11,406 years. And Sedna entered Gemini on June of 2023 and will be in Gemini for 44 years. Anything you want to add to that?
I am thinking that, let's see, you mentioned about the activation. Yes, it is there to stay now. That's fine. There was something, but it's gone.
That's fine. Well, we're going to go on to Neptune because we're laying the foundation. So, because even though the dwarfs are beyond Neptune, but Neptune is pretty active when we get to the astrology chart of these planets. So, archetypal Neptune in Aries. Go ahead.
If I might say, because we've been waiting, and you could look at ever since Haumea, Sedna, and Pluto activated, that there were other points where they were in, because 2 are in air signs and 1 is in water. So they form at 0 degrees an automatic yod, which isn't exact perfect, but it can come in and out in different ways. But with Neptune ingress last week on the 30th of Aries, and it too will go out for a while. This, when we look at that chart later, that's why we're bringing in Neptune, is because it's energizing this yod powerfully.
So the archetype of Neptune in Aries is new forms of merging, transcendence, art, imagination, intuition, inspiration, spirituality, extraordinarily magical. And the caution with Neptune is delusional, boundarylessness, addiction, and escapism. Do you want to add anything to that?
It's important to recognize what needs to be of material value and what needs to be of spiritual. Certainly they integrate, I believe, very strongly. Yet what I'm getting at is that you're worried about boundaries. The spirit world hasn't any boundaries in some ways, although then again, we're taught to keep our energy within ourselves and not merge into somebody else's energy. You collect their clutter and you also interfere with their energy on that respect. However, when it says about magical, that's a vibrational astrology aspect that says Neptune is how we get attracted to the visions that really make this life special. And it could be a baseball game, it could be a concert for some, and then again, it could be sitting and meditating with their ohms.
Yes, new visions, that's for sure. So Neptune ingress into 0 Aries, like Sue mentioned, on March 30th. And will be there for 14 years until 2039, and activating that 0 point Aries 2 times in 2025 and once in 2026, and the orbit of Neptune is 165 years.
It's huge. I think to myself sometimes, what's the largest impact that we're experiencing. And it's very hard to tell when there's like dominoes and they're all interjecting. But to have 160, it hasn't happened since the Civil War. I think, is that right? Yes, 165 years. Has that been? No. Anyway, it hasn't happened for 165 years in Aries. And it's certainly not in our lifetime. And 14 years is a long time. I think, weren't you reflecting, Liz, about how...
Yes,
Well, that was
Neptune's in a sign
Uranus.
about 14 years, plus or minus, because sometimes it can be a little shorter and sometimes a little longer. And so, you know, that's a Saturn opposition or a Saturn conjunction. So it's like, you know, so that's interesting that it parallels to Saturn cycles too.
True, but you were mentioning that when it ingressed Pisces, some of the physical events that happened. Remember about the
Oh,
tsunami?
yes. We had an earthquake in Japan. So to me, it really activates things in the earth and oftentimes below, because it does rule the ocean, Neptune.
And
But,
earthquakes.
mhm.
Neptune rules earthquakes. Go ahead.
Yeah, and we've had some earthquakes, so it's kind of interesting. We'll have to just see how it goes. So there could
Yes.
be some for a while, or some different earth activity, I would say, perhaps.
Yeah, it is interesting. Poseidon, one forgets that it was earthquakes and horses.
So now we're going to move on to the dwarf planet Pluto. And the archetype of Pluto in Aquarius is transformation, power and control, underworld and subconscious, death and regeneration, hidden truths, shadow and secrecy. And since it's in Aquarius, we added groups, community, and networking. That there could be a lot of changes, and that can apply to that. Would you like to add anything, Sue?
I think the fact that Pluto is involved helps us a lot, because we understand as much as we don't understand, but at least we have a grasp of what Pluto's transformation might involve. It too has kind of elliptical cycle, but lately it's in its signs that move quicker, such as it was in Sagittarius and then Capricorn. Those were all 11, 12 years, I think. And then it moved into, now it's in Aquarius. Let me think. Oh, Aquarius, no, Capricorn was 18 years. That's right. Was it 18 years? 16 years. And
Yes.
Now in Aquarius. So it's beginning to get longer. But we often talk about regeneration and our shadows. So I think, always though, when it enters a new sign is a huge challenge. We haven't seen how it works with that exactly. So
Right, because nobody's alive when the last time Pluto was in Aquarius. So that's a long time. And if I remember correctly, Pluto will be in Aquarius about 20 years.
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
Yes. And it's on this slide, Pluto at 0 degrees Aquarius, and the transits from 2023 to 2044, and the different times that 0 degrees Aquarius was activated in March of 2023 through November of 2024. There'll be 5 activations.
And what's important about these timelines for our audience is to recognize, and the reason we've gone through this step by step is to show how they've, like a tide, they've entered and they've retreated. They've entered and retreated. However, as of 2024, and they are here to stay. I mean, Pluto is here to stay in Aquarius. Haumea is here to stay in Scorpio. And Sedna is here to stay in Gemini. So these other planets, as we move along, like Neptune, will, because they're just entering and they have large orbits, will filter in and filter out a little bit, but not, yeah.
And the orbit of Pluto is 248 years, and as Sue mentioned, it's elliptical. So now we're going to get to the chart that we want to talk about. And this chart was cast for March 30th at Greenwich time. And like Sue had mentioned earlier, there's a yod or a finger of God. and Sedna is sextile to Neptune and pointing to Haumea, so that makes a yod or a finger of God, and that Haumea
in green. It's in green, folks. See the green with the light blue. That's all.
and the Haumea is the focal point of that yod. So, so what do you think this yod might be asking us to do, or what it might be working on?
Yods are a strong, well, yods are created because of the astrological aspects. It's a mathematical issue. So those green lines are 150 degrees, which is a quincunx astrologically. And the other two are in a sextile, 60 degrees, which happens to be Sedna and Neptune. They're sharing, they're connecting, they're both in air signs, and well, they're not in air, one's in fire, one's in air, but they feed each other. Air feeds fire, fire, they can work with each other. The other is in water, and it's a real learning process. It's something that we don't automatically do. We are not rebirthing that easily. It may be our spiritual destiny, and Neptune is going to help dissolve or shake things up so that that is going to be possible. But it isn't a given. There isn't an automatic manual for this. It is deep and prolonged and a whole, like a Shakespearean play. And it's not even just one, like you've got your tragedies, you've got your comedies, and they get mixed up, right? It's a whole flux.
I would say, since Neptune rules the ocean and Sedna is the goddess of the ocean, that, and Haumea is about birthing, that we may discover, the scientists may discover some new species, or they'll go deeper into the ocean and find more creatures that we haven't known about. So like this exploration of the sea and finding out so much more information about it. I'm excited about that.
I love to hear that. And I also wonder, will we get like kelp? Kelp, a lot of people in the Asian countries eat kelp. And it has all, here in Hawaii, you see it in the stores all the time, Costco. And it's very nutritional. If you had like supplements, I used to work for a health store, and a very reasonable way to get a lot of good nutriments is to buy kelp, or maybe it was alfalfa, come to think of it. Sorry about that. But the point is, kelp is so nutritional. And the other thing I was thinking is, I wonder, my husband is big on this, that we're going to start living under the water, which for me, being an air person, is a little scary. But he's determined that where else are we going to go? And as we see, many of the wealthy go on these yachts, these crazy yachts. So they see the ocean as a refuge. But your focus, that's what I'm bringing up, Liz, to support you, this focus on the water, which we're 70+% water, the same percentage as our body. It's the one factor of the 7 seas, but where I live in the middle of the Pacific, it's half the globe. You look at the globe, which I have sitting on my table, we're in the middle. Well, there's a lot of water.
On an island in the sea.
Really? I know. It changes the whole dynamics. You begin to realize the circulation of water. That's the other thing. Water is going to be a huge circulator. It's the one dissolvent, as you're bringing up with Neptune. It's in fire, but the fact is that the universal dissolver seems to be water, not salt water so much, but water, any kind of water. It is salt water, because salt's it preserves, and it also breaks down things. It corrodes a lot of time. So it's this whole cycle of,
Right, they might grow more food, the seaweed and the kelp, and they could have a desalination improvements of how to
yes.
help different places with water if that's an issue. So I'm excited to look forward to those
And
inventions.
that's been brought up too. Again, I've heard that about the desalinization, because if people are worried about the lack of food, which is, not everything is plus. There's also like, how are we changing our foods? Like, okay, I'll shift gears here. Hydroponics. Hydroponics might become, I know they're getting much more popular over here. I bought some strawberries and they were enormous. As I was checking out, you have to show your receipt. And he said, oh, those are really big strawberries. I said, well, yeah. And he says, well, because they're hydroponic. I thought, oh, that's interesting. I don't know. Maybe it is not just the wrong nutriments for it. But I would think that hydroponics, where if in the middle of the nation, Nebraska, Kansas, all those cities that are ravaged sometimes by storms and not the best conditions, if they could somehow ideally think of indoor food buildings, and then I'm going to really dream, have solar energy or some kind of energy that would perpetuate it. So, because water and lights need some energy,
Exactly.
gross
So
light.
we're going to move on to the talent trine. So
Okay.
we have Sedna is sextile to Neptune. Neptune is sextile to Pluto. And then Pluto is trine back to Sedna, creating that mini grand trine or talent trine. So what's your idea about this talent trine, Sue?
That is a huge convergence of energies, because here you have Pluto that already transforms and transmutes, and you have rebirth Haumea. It is in a square, meaning that Haumea and Pluto are really the two, I would say, tools here activating everything. Haumea is in this yod, and Pluto is in this mini trine, which is a very productive working to produce it. I mean, it may not be the product that we think is so, I have to say that just because something is working doesn't mean it's working in the favor that we see as right. You know what I'm saying? So that if Pluto is transforming things with Sedna, and they're both air signs, that we have a lot of technology happening as one, and thoughts. There's a lot of, with the internet, such as we're doing, but politically and on and artistically too. There's a lot of, I think Neptune brings in a lot of art. There's different ways of communicating. I think that is how I'll end this, is that it's not simple. It's not going to be linear. And we're going to use many forms, many languages, using not just the words that we're familiar with, but how do we express ourselves? Body language, art, music, film.
Well, that Haumea square Pluto, Haumea is about birth and rebirth, and Pluto's about death and rebirth. So I would say we're in, a new phase of recreating on from very deep, on a very foundational level, from the basics to build up, and then to that mini grand trine. Pluto is about the underworld, Neptune is about the sea, and Sedna is about the sea too. So, there could be volcanoes in the ocean, which I know sometimes that happens because off of Oregon there's one, but I know that there's more than just one. So, maybe the oceans are growing on some level, because I know sea levels are rising, and they're rising faster than what they thought they were going to rise. But how are they going to work with that? We have to find a solution to work with that, because there's so many places that are at sea level.
Absolutely. It does change the landmass again and again, whether it's Miami or whether it's islands across the whole nation, the Philippines, perhaps, everywhere where it's at sea level, it's going to encroach on the shores. I know they talk about it in Hawaii, because Honolulu, of course, is such a large tourist mega center. And even here, it's everywhere in that regard, this adjustment to working with nature. It is very much with, we're not always in the ones that have the ultimate power. There was more, though, that you brought up. I wish I could backtrack, or I should be writing notes here. I know.
So is there anything else you want to talk about this
Well,
chart?
well, that is, I think what it is to recognize that this is not the only chart. As we progress in the next couple of months, Liz, you and I are planning just to let people know that there's other incremental changes. There's going to be, as Neptune is, the picture that we're seeing with Neptune ingressing a fire sign, and it's adjusting what has been a rebirth, but on a new energy level. And that's going to continue because we have other archetypal changes. We're going to bring up the one when Jupiter goes into Cancer, which is going to change things. And then we have, anyway, there's other adjustments as we go further.
Right, but that we covered the seed point pretty well. Now we're going to go on and talk about the Sabian symbols with these planets that we've talked about. And Sabian symbols were channeled in 1925 by spiritualist medium Elsie Wheeler with assistance of Mark Edmund Jones. And they're sayings that create an image, and they're very interesting to use. And so they were, came up with 100 years ago. So sometimes the language is a little old or outdated, but we're going to dive into them anyway. So we're going to start off with a 1 degrees Gemini because you round it up. And we're going to start with Sedna. So would you like to start, Sue?
Well, the imagery is you're in a boat. You're in the water, interestingly. It's a glass bottom boat you can see underneath. And what it reveals is everything within that world. You're entering a whole new dynamic, a realm. You're enclosed in the physicality still, but you're able to get through that veil, you could say, because of the dynamics. So the keynote is a revelation of unconscious energies. That's what under the water represents. It's an emotional, and especially with the ocean, it's the whole womb of everything. And submerged psychic structures. Go ahead, Liz.
Yeah, a new dimension of reality. And, since Sedna is the goddess of the sea, it's like an appropriate Sabian symbol, but it's like resetting that that activation point. So I like that.
And I like a few of his extra, and for people can read this online because it adds a great deal. But that conscious mind, that paragraph that says becomes translucent. So in other words, these revelations aren't just a Disney show to go, oh my gosh, and leave, but they penetrate, they permeate into the subconscious to become conscious. It changes our perspective, that new dimension of reality, providing a person is willing. You have to be willing to discover and integrate it. So I think that's an important factor because Gemini is a mental sign. Mercury is very mental, but it works. The twins go between spirit and matter. So this is strong.
Okay, now we're going to go on to the Sabian symbol for Haumea, which is 3 degrees Scorpio. A house raising party in a small village enlists the neighbors' cooperation. And the keynote is the feeling of community demonstrated in a basic joint effort. And the keyword is cooperation.
It's
and
a wonderful.
Go ahead.
Was a wonderful addition. Now remember that Sedna and Haumea are in this yod that they're trying to learn. So in other words, as we are revealing all these great insights and these not just insight, but they are insights, and we're willing to go into this new dimension of reality, we still need to bring other people along with us to have this sense of community, to work together. It's not just an isolation process. It's a participation with common in Scorpio, in this particular degree of Scorpio. So in other words, another part of this that I'm reading here is that last part where it says your feeling becomes, because Scorpio is a very emotional sign. It's part of the water and it's strongly passionate about what it believes, that the past and all the memories, they become perhaps expanded, and there is a new sense of reality, but it is within the social context. That's, I think, fascinating, because that's not always easy to find. I've seen something, and who understands it? Who can I talk to? But that's part of today, and that's part of this air happening.
And then we're going on to Neptune at 1 Aries. Go ahead and talk about this one, please.
Okay, it is in the very first, because they go from 1 to 30, because they get rounded off for those new to Sabians. A woman just risen from the sea. A seal is embracing her. How Sedna can we get? And here's Neptune, because that's interesting. Our cohort. I don't know if you hear Justin calling me, but
Oh, okay.
Justin, yeah, wait. Any rate, so here it is. She is part of this, even though it's fire, it's with the sea. And that's, again, a lot of rebirth, because from the ocean is the volcanoes that erupt there, and life, we think, began probably from that dynamics. And a seal with Sedna, her fingers, as you pointed out, she became this sustenance factor. So it's a wonderful idea. So in other words, the keynote, and I'll break off from there, emergence of new forms and of the potentiality of consciousness. So again, we're working on this factor, birthing.
Right. And then the action, I like what it says, a leaving behind and emerging from a womb. And the key word is an impulse to be. So it's like, Neptune into Aries is a new sign. And so that feels very appropriate, because it's a new beginning, a new vision, a new dream.
Yes. This takes a great deal of thought. This one here, Neptune in Aries, because we're just beginning. The others have been there, and so they're a little bit more along as far as this chart goes. But again, the reason we chose this is because Neptune is entering Aries. And so before we go, I just wanted to think, it says opening 2 paths, one to perfection and the other to disintegration. So again, it brings up what you have mentioned about the dissolving, Liz, that it is part of chaos. There's order in chaos. It seems chaotic until we find some order. But so I guess we need to suspend our judgment somewhat. Let this impulse just be and see how it works.
Exactly. And then the Sabian symbol for Pluto is for Aquarius. A Hindu yogi demonstrates his healing powers. And the keynote is the disciplined use of spiritual energies in restoring the natural harmony distributed by man's inharmonic attempts to transcend nature through mind. And it's the key word is focusing on spiritual energy. What would you like to add to this?
Oh my goodness. It does bring up the idea of a very spiritual basis, a Hindu yogi. It's for the Western world, this is another culture. And I know that we had Yogananda, who came across back in the 1920s and did a huge amount of work with people's consciousness, and now to understand. But here, it's our duty, it's suggesting, to tap into this force and to heal and to help with others. So we'll have to see, because Pluto is suggesting by its nature, I guess, that we're not, and with Aquarius, this is not alone, that there is a network. It's helping with those other Sabians to say, we have community. Let's find out who it is.
Exactly. And getting in touch with community, and even though we have differences, to accept our differences and move forward for the greater of the whole.
and make it whole. I see that highlighted there, making whole what was lost as its natural root. Because if we're looking at Haumea, who is very much part of nature, nature, ever since mythology, really with the Greeks, has divorced itself somewhat from nature. Perhaps they had to, because it was a very difficult world and brutal in a lot of ways. We've since protected a certain part of this world in today's century, has protected themselves. Other parts are still quite at the ravages of disease and bugs and nature. So I think the fact is, though, that it's not against it, it's working with it.
Thank you. And the references and sources that we used were both graduates of the Dwarf Planet University in New Zealand and Australia. Alan Clay's book on Sedna, and he also has other books. And then Philip Sedgwick, Linda Berry, Astro.com, and Pam Gregory, and she has a YouTube channel. So we appreciate all those resources, and there's many more, but we'll be, as we add more shows, we'll be sharing more resources with everybody. I want to thank everybody that's joined us live today. I want to thank Sue for joining me and working on this project. So can you round up something of what to leave people with about the activation point of the dwarf planets?
I would say that we're on a path that at best seems alone. If we look at, just for instance, of being on a boat in the waves of change, and certainly we can see that occurring just if you listen to the news, and it ripples into our world, because that's what we're wanting to do anyway. Have courage. Mars is a lot about courage. Aries, it's ruled by Mars. And realize that we're related more than our differences, that there are people that are also experiencing these, and even a small group, however it is, can build and create, whether you build that house, such as Haumea is doing, or however it is, that there's growth and directions.
Yes, new beginnings,
New ways.
creation, new ways. Yes. And,
Yes.
this is another cycle on top of the Aries point being reactivated, this creation of our subconscious and conscious, bringing things to light, so to speak, waking us up. I mean, it's like a whole new beginning, I think.
I love that, Liz. And the fact that we're learning to express differently. There's so many ways, even our language and how we say it, we've had perhaps a certain purpose that we've associated with it. And so it needs to be very clear. And we're always trying to be clear, but yet perhaps when we bring in those analogies, such as we did with the Sabian symbols, it's imagery. They say that a picture's worth 1,000 words, but which words are you going to choose to illustrate and to carry through a theme when it's not necessarily a point that you can see? It's more of an ideology. It's something in our minds and our hearts. But vision is what started everything. It goes back and back again. And certainly, if we look at what we thought was concrete, the earth signs, they really are very creative too, because they had to imagine something in order to produce. So it's a matter of perspective. We're in the mix.
Exactly. So, other upcoming shows with Astrology Star Sisters is Chinese astrology, decans, dwarf planets, fixed stars, planet stationing, Uranian astrology, and Venus star point. There's still a couple episodes for the astrological highlights of 2025, and a new show, Cosmic Connections, using relationship astrology and magical astrology with Robert. And the astrology forecast and the full moon forecast I do with Justin each month. And then from time to time, we do a Chiron asteroid series. Sue is the host of Talk Cosmos, and I'm one of the team members. And we will be talking about the Taurus new moon at 7 degrees of Taurus. Imagine the future on April 27th at 1 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. So you can join us there. And Sue, I'll let you talk about your slide.
Thank you, Liz. Yes, Talk Cosmos. We're in the 8th season. There's 6 different panels that I rotate. Liz and I have a very similar format, and we bring in different people and sometimes the same people, but it's a lot of, it's dynamic, and I appreciate anybody that is interested.
And Sue has a newsletter, so you can sign up for that if you would like to do that and check out her shows. Again, to get a hold of Sue, it's talkcosmos.com, and my website is alightpath.com. And I want to thank all those that are watching live, those that come back and watch at a later date. And Sue, thank you so much for joining me today, and I look forward to having you on again pretty soon here.
To the new. Thank
Okay,
you, Liz.
So we're going to say goodbye for now, and we'll see you all next time.